Elias Voss had never been the kind of man people noticed right away. He was not loud. He did not push himself forward in a crowd. He simply existed in the quiet corners of Grey Creek Pack territory, doing the work that needed to be done, speaking only when something important needed to be said. He ran the forest borders every morning before the sun came up, checked the perimeter markers, tracked unfamiliar scents, and reported back to the pack. It was not a glamorous role, but it was his, and he did it better than anyone else ever had. The other wolves in the pack did not dislike him. That would have been too simple. What they felt was something harder to name, a kind of uneasiness that settled in the room whenever Elias walked into it. Grown men would lower their eyes without knowing why. Women would stop mid-conversation and watch him pass. Even Alpha Breck, the stocky and self-important man who led Grey Creek with more pride than sense, would sometimes pause during pack meetings and glance at Elias with an expression that looked almost like uncertainty. Elias noticed all of it. He had always noticed. But he had also learned, over 23 years, that noticing too much and saying too little was the safest way to live. So he kept his head down, did his work, went home to his mother every evening, and told himself that the strange heaviness he always carried in his chest was just the way things were. His mother, Seraphine, was a gentle and careful woman. She had soft eyes and a quiet laugh, and hands that always smelled of the herb garden she kept behind their small house. She loved Elias, in the way a river loves the bank it runs beside, steadily, constantly, without needing to explain itself. She had raised him alone. She never spoke about his father. And Elias, for most of his life, had accepted that silence the way you accept the weather. You do not like it, but you learn to move around it. It was on an ordinary Tuesday morning that the silence finally broke, not because his mother chose to end it, but because the world did it for her. Elias was crossing the pack square when he heard the news playing from someone's open window. A royal advisor named Elder Phase had been found dead. Among his belongings, investigators had discovered a sealed document bearing the royal Draven bloodline crest. The document named a woman, Seraphine Grey, and it named a child, born 23 years ago, with royal blood, hidden somewhere in the outer wolf territories. Elias stopped walking. The morning sounds around him went distant and strange. He stood in the middle of the square and listened to the broadcast finish, and then he stood there for a little longer, not moving, not breathing properly, while the information settled somewhere deep inside him and began to rearrange things. He went home. His mother was already sitting at the kitchen table when he walked in. She was not eating. She was not reading. She was just sitting there with her hands folded in her lap, looking at the table like she was waiting for something she had always known was coming. Elias pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. He did not raise his voice. He did not accuse her of anything. He simply looked at her and said, quietly, "That is your name, isn't it? Seraphine Grey." She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were full of tears she refused to let fall. "Yes," she said, "that is my name." What came out of her then was not a confession. It was more like a wall finally giving way, after years of holding back something much larger than itself. She told him everything. How she had once been bonded, truly bonded, in the way that happens only once in a wolf's lifetime, to the man who would become Alpha King Callum Draven. How they had loved each other completely and quietly, far from the politics of the royal court. How she had discovered she was carrying Elias at almost the exact moment the royal council delivered Callum an ultimatum: renounce the bond with Seraphine, or watch two territories go to war over the legitimacy of an Omega Wolf's claim to stand beside the king. The council had made the choice sound reasonable. Thousands of lives against one woman's heart. Callum had not wanted to let her go. She knew that. She had always known that. But he had let her go anyway, and the document recording Elias's true parentage had been sealed and buried in the hands of a trusted advisor, Elder Phase, with instructions that it would never be opened unless the king commanded it. Phase had died with that secret, and now the world had it. Elias sat across from his mother for a long time without speaking. He was not angry at her. He understood, with a clarity that surprised him, why she had done what she did. She had taken her child to the farthest edge of known wolf territory and built a small, careful life around keeping him safe. Every choice she had ever made had been for him. He could see that now, looking back at every quiet moment, every careful deflection, every night she had watched him sleep with that expression on her face that he had never quite been able to read. He understood it now. It was the look of someone who loves you so much it frightens them. He got up from the table, walked out of the house, and ran. He did not run as a man. He shifted as soon as the trees closed around him, and the wolf that emerged from that shift was not the same wolf the Grey Creek pack had ever seen when Elias ran the borders. It was enormous, black as deep water, with amber gold eyes that lit up the dark between the trees. It moved through the forest without sound, without effort, like something that had been waiting a very long time to finally stretch its legs. Elias ran until his lungs burned, until the rage and grief and shock had somewhere to go, until the only thing left was a quiet that felt different from all the quiet he had known before. This one felt like the truth. He stayed in the forest until dawn. By the time he came back, two things had happened. The first was that a team of royal investigators had arrived at Grey Creek's border, bearing the king's seal. The second was that a convoy of 6 men, who arrived claiming to be traitors, had entered the pack territory from the southern road. Elias felt the second group before he saw them. There was something wrong in the way they moved, too controlled, too practiced. Their eyes swept the territory with professional precision, not the lazy curiosity of men interested in trade. He caught their scent on the wind, and understood immediately what it meant. These were not traitors. These were men sent to make sure a confirmed heir never made it to the royal court. He intercepted them at the southern tree line, alone, before they reached the first pack houses. Alpha Breck, when Elias had tried to warn him, had waved him off with the usual combination of irritation and dismissal. So Elias had stopped asking for permission and simply went. What happened in the next 4 minutes was something that the 3 pack wolves who witnessed it from a distance would talk about for years afterward. Elias did not fight the way a trained soldier fights, with planned moves and calculated technique. He moved the way something moves when it has finally stopped holding itself back. 2 of the 6 men dropped to their knees before he even reached them, their bodies responding to something instinctive and ancient that overrode everything they had been trained to do. The other 4 were stopped quickly and quietly, without any of them causing harm to the pack behind him. When it was over, Elias stood in the tree line, barely breathing hard, and turned to find Alpha Breck staring at him from 30 feet away. For the first time in Elias's memory, the man looked genuinely, deeply unsettled. The lead royal investigator, a sharp and composed woman named Commander Thessa, walked up to Elias as the pack was still processing what they had seen. She looked at him for a moment, then said, without preamble, "The Alpha King requests your presence at the Draven court." He was very clear that it is a request, not a command. She paused. "He also asked me to tell you something specific." "What?" Elias said. He said, "He has always known who you are." Elias left the next morning. He did not take much. His traveling bag, a change of clothes, the small carved wolf figure his mother had given him on his 16th birthday. Seraphine stood at the door as he prepared to leave, and she held him for a long moment without saying anything. When she finally let go, she looked at him the way she had looked at him all his life, with that enormous, frightened love, and said only, "You are more than they ever let you be. Remember that." He would. There was one other unexpected addition to his party. As the convoy moved toward the main road, a figure stepped out from beside the pack's outer fence. Mira Dane leaned against the post with her arms crossed and her chin lifted, and when Elias raised an eyebrow, she said, "You don't know what you're walking into. You are clearly going anyway. Someone should watch your back." Elias looked at her for a moment. He had known Mira for years, had felt something pulling between them for just as long, something he had never allowed himself to examine too closely. She was direct and honest, and occasionally very difficult, and she was looking at him right now like the matter was already settled. "Fine," he said, and they kept walking. The Draven court was everything Grey Creek was not. It was enormous and ancient, and built with the kind of permanence that makes a place feel like it has always existed, and always will. High stone walls, wide corridors, the sound of many wolves moving through spaces designed to echo. Elias walked through the main gates and felt every set of eyes in the entrance hall shift toward him. He had felt unwanted attention before. He had felt the sideways looks of wolves who did not know what to make of him. This was different. What he felt now was not curiosity or unease. It was recognition. The involuntary, bone-deep recognition that every wolf in that hall was experiencing as he walked past them. High-ranking wolves, wolves who answered to no one but the king himself, were lowering their gaze as he moved through the corridor, not because someone told them to, because their instincts were telling them something their minds had not yet caught up with. He was brought to a private chamber. The Alpha King was already there. Callum Draven was a large man who carried himself with the stillness of someone who had long ago learned not to waste energy on things that did not matter. He had Elias's dark coloring, and, Elias noticed with a sharp jolt, his exact eye color. The amber gold was unmistakable. Callum looked at his son for a long moment, and did not try to smile, did not try to make the moment smaller than it was. He simply looked, and then he spoke. He did not make excuses. He told Elias the truth, the full, uncomfortable truth, about the choice the royal council had forced on him. He explained the threat of war. He explained the impossible arithmetic of the situation as it had stood 23 years ago. He said he had known about Elias every year of those 23 years, and that he had watched from a distance, and that not reaching out was the decision he was most ashamed of. He did not ask for forgiveness. He said clearly, "Whatever you choose to do with this information, you deserve to have it. That is all I am offering you tonight. The truth, finally, without condition." Elias was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I am not here for you. I am here because something was taken from me before I was born, and I intend to take it back." The king closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he nodded once. It was not a warm moment, but it was an honest one, and somewhere in the long, difficult road ahead of them, it was a beginning. 2 days later, Lord Soren Draven, the king's younger brother and the man who had spent 20 years positioning himself as the throne's natural successor, invoked an ancient legal clause requiring any unverified heir to submit to a public bloodline confirmation ceremony within 48 hours, or forfeit all claims permanently. He announced it to the royal council in the morning. By afternoon, the supernatural press had the story. By evening, every channel and broadcast in the wolf world was covering it. The heir would be confirmed, or exposed, publicly, in front of everyone. Elias spent the night before the ceremony on the balcony of his guest chambers, with Mira beside him. The city spread out below them, lit and alive. They did not talk about the ceremony. They talked about smaller things, about the forest at Grey Creek, about the way the pre-dawn air smelled different here in the city, about a memory Elias had from years ago, of a particular morning run where he had found 3 wolf pups sleeping in a hollow log, and had sat with them for almost an hour, just because he could. Mira laughed at that story. She had a real laugh, honest and unguarded, and it was the first time Elias had heard it without either of them keeping careful distance from the other. He looked at her in the quiet after it faded, and said, "When this is over, whatever shape it takes, I am not letting you leave." She looked back at him, without pretending not to understand. "Good," she said simply, "because I was tired of pretending I wanted to." The bloodline confirmation chamber was filled to capacity the next morning. Every member of the royal council was present. The Alpha King sat in his formal chair to the right. Lord Soren sat to the left, composed on the surface, but Elias noticed the tight set of his jaw and the careful blankness in his eyes that told a different story. A dozen cameras broadcast the proceedings live across every territory in the supernatural world. At the center of the chamber stood the bloodline stone. It was an ancient artifact, darker than it looked in pictures, roughly the size of a large man's torso. It responded to genuine Draven blood by producing a light resonance, a glow that could not be faked, could not be manufactured, could not be argued with. The stone did not care about politics. It did not respond to charm or pressure, or carefully worded legal clauses. It simply told the truth. Soren's allies on the council immediately began raising procedural objections the moment Elias entered the chamber. They questioned the stone's neutrality. They demanded documentation of its last independent verification. They cited historical precedents that most people in the room had never heard of. They were buying time, and everyone in the chamber knew it. Elias walked through all of it to the center of the room and stopped in front of the stone. He did not look at the council. He did not look at Soren. He looked at the stone for a moment, and then he placed his hand on it. The chamber went completely silent. The stone did not simply glow. It erupted, A column of amber gold light rose from it so intensely that several council members stumbled backward. The resonance it produced was not just visible, it was felt. A deep vibration that moved through the floor and the walls and into the bones of every wolf standing in that room. There was nothing ambiguous about it. There was nothing to interpret or debate. The chamber had its answer. Lord Soren rose from his seat. He began to speak, loudly, forcefully, already reaching for the language of challenge. He got 3 words out before the Alpha King stood up. Callum Draven rose to his full height in the silence, and when he spoke, his voice filled the chamber without effort. "Enough," he said. He looked at his son, standing in the amber gold light of the stone, and the composure the king had worn like armor, his entire public life cracked just slightly. Just enough. "He is mine." Soren's allies fell quiet one by one. 2 council members stood and crossed the chamber to stand on Elias's side without being asked. Soren, isolated now, made the last mistake available to him. He stepped forward physically, reaching for a challenge that every wolf law in existence classified as treason against a confirmed royal heir. The royal guards had him before he completed the step. As he was escorted from the chamber, Soren turned and looked at Elias with everything he had spent 20 years building collapsing behind his eyes. Elias held his gaze and said nothing. He did not need to. The stone was still glowing behind him. The cameras were still running. The world had already seen everything it needed to see. Seraphine arrived at the Draven court 2 days later, at Elias's personal request. The meeting between her and the Alpha King took place in a small receiving room, with only Elias and Mira present as witnesses. It was not a happy reunion. Too much time had passed, and too much of it had been painful, for it to be anything so simple. But Callum stood before her and asked her forgiveness in plain, direct words, not in a whisper, not wrapped in excuses, but clearly, in front of their son, taking full responsibility for the choice he had made. Seraphine did not forgive him immediately. She was not that kind of woman, and the wound was not that kind of wound. But she listened, and when she finally spoke, she said, "What you gave me, even inside all the pain, was the best thing I have ever had. So I suppose we were not entirely lost." She looked at Elias when she said it. Callum followed her gaze. Neither of them had anything to add to that. What settled between the 3 of them in that room was not a family in the easy, ordinary sense. It was something more complicated and more real. 3 people connected by blood and sacrifice, and 23 years of a secret, finding their way to something that could, with time and honesty, become solid ground. When the formal confirmation ceremony was held 3 days later, the entire supernatural world tuned in to watch. Elias stood at the center of the Draven Court's grand hall and was presented with the traditional choice that every confirmed heir faced: accept the title and its obligations, or renounce the bloodline and walk free. He stood there for a moment. He looked at his mother, sitting in the front row with her hands folded and her eyes steady. He looked at Mira, standing at his right shoulder, composed and present and entirely herself. He looked, finally, at the Alpha King, his father, who sat in the royal chair and offered him nothing in that look but honesty. This was Elias's choice, and no one else's. Elias turned back to the hall. When he spoke, his voice carried without effort, clear and calm, reaching every corner of the room and every broadcast in the world beyond it. "I am Elias Voss Draven. For 23 years, you did not know my name. Now you do. I did not come here to take power for the sake of having it. I came because what belongs to me was kept from me, and I intend to use it honestly, with care, and without apology. That is what I promise you today." The hall was silent for one long breath, then it was not. In the weeks that followed, things moved quickly, and then slowly, in the way that real change always does. A rush of events, and then the long, quiet work of rebuilding. Lord Soren faced a formal council tribunal. The evidence against him was thorough. His fate was placed, by court tradition, in the hands of the confirmed heir to decide. Elias chose exile, not execution, not imprisonment in the traditional sense, but removal, permanent and without appeal. When the tribunal asked him to explain his reasoning, Elias said only, "I was hidden from the world for 23 years. He will know what that is like." No one in the room argued. Mira was formally recognized as his fated bondmate, a fact that needed no announcement, because every wolf who had seen them together already understood it. She was offered a ceremonial title by the court's protocol officials. She declined politely and requested instead a formal appointment as head of the heir's personal security and intelligence operations. The officials, who had not expected this, agreed after only a brief pause. She began work the following morning. Seraphine returned to Grey Creek. She did not stay at the court. It was not her world, and she had built something real in the place she had called home for 2 decades. But the road between her home and the Draven court was no longer closed to her. She came when she wanted to. She left when she needed to. For the first time since she was a young woman standing at the edge of an impossible decision, she moved through the world freely. Elias and Callum began the slow, careful work of building something between them. It was not easy. There were silences that lasted too long, and conversations that had to be had twice before they landed right. There were moments when the 23 years between them felt like a physical thing sitting in the room with them, taking up space. But they kept showing up. They kept talking. And slowly, the way all real things grow, something began to take shape. It was not the story of a perfect father and son. It was not the story of a man who reclaimed his throne and lived without difficulty ever after. It was the story of a person who had spent his entire life being something the world did not have a name for yet, and who finally, in the amber gold light of a stone that told only the truth, became exactly who he had always been. The secret was out. The heir had shown himself, and the world, which had not known it was waiting for him, would not forget him now.